Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Beyond the Box Score. Trayvon Hastings, Joey Korzanowski, as always. And we're going to dedicate this episode, it's going to be a shorter one, but we're going to dedicate it fully to March Madness Selection Sunday taking place yesterday. For those who follow ESPN and Joe Lunardi and his bracketology, he got all 68 teams correct. He also got all 37 at-large bids correct. All but roughly 10 of those were in the proper seed line for Joe Lunardi. So arguably his best year doing bracketology, and hopefully we get one of the better March Madness tournaments in, I don't want to say quite some time, but definitely a step up from last season when it was almost all chalk. We're going to hope for some more upsets as really it's been that kind of year. I feel like some of these teams in the back half of the top 25 are susceptible to losing some of these games, and obviously we have the elite of the elites. But what stuck out to you in Selection Sunday? Some of the things that maybe transpired. What sleepers do you have? So on and so forth.
Yeah, I think the main thing that stuck out to me is that this East region is just absolutely loaded. I think this is going to be a slugfest. I mean, just looking at it, I could probably name four or five teams that I can see coming out of this region. So I think Duke got a pretty bad draw. I think that UConn, Michigan State. This is going to be a tough region. Some of these other regions, like you go down to Michigan's region. Which region is that? The Midwest. I feel like it's kind of one or two teams that you really feel like can kind of come out of it. It's kind of same with the West region. Feels like Arizona has a pretty easy path to the Final Four. So they definitely loaded up this East region, and for good reason. I mean, some of these teams, have had some up and down regular seasons. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be an easy path for Duke to get to the East. So kind of a shame on the committee for giving the overall number one seed in the tournament, arguably the hardest region to play in. I think we could see a lot of upsets there. But yeah, in the Open, you mentioned last year a lot of chalk, not very many upsets. I just don't know if we're going to have the same thing this year. It's hard because with the era that we're in with college basketball, as you know, it's not going to be as many upsets, just with players from smaller schools transferring up. You don't have that same continuity. You don't really see teams like Akron or Miami of Ohio very much anymore that stay with the same team. They keep that same team, that same program for multiple years. So I think going forward, it's going to be kind of the norm where you're going to see some of these higher seeds have more success, but I can see a couple of upsets going on here. If you want to talk some upsets, Troy over Nebraska. I am not high on this Nebraska team at all. I think Troy could potentially have an upset there. North Carolina is trending in the wrong direction. I think VCU can get them there. Kind of go to the other side. High Point in Wisconsin. I think that's going to be a track meet. I don't know if High Point has the defense to stop Wisconsin. I mean, that honestly kind of feels like Kansas and Samford from 2 years ago, where it's probably going to be like 110, 100 Wisconsin. Even going down, Akron over Texas Tech. Texas Tech is just so high variance with how many threes they shoot. If Akron, I think they play a little more consistent. If they can catch Texas Tech on an off shooting night, I can see Akron advancing. I think there's definitely more opportunities for a double-digit seed to advance here in this tournament because last year, how many double-digit seeds advanced? Was it just McNeese over Clemson? Was that literally it?
There's been, I believe, 17 consecutive years that we've had at least five double digit seeds advance to the round of 32. So at least five is typically the number to look for. What five those are going to be this year, TBD. I think there's definitely a couple tens that could pull it off, and maybe a couple of the 12 seeds. But outside of that, there's not really a ton of teams past that 12 seed line that I think pulls off the upset. There's a couple teams that like I'll mention. Yeah, it's definitely gonna be another potential low variance type of upset central March Madness. I know we got accustomed to seeing some of the crazy ones with Furman and Oral Roberts in recent memory, but with this NIL era, I do agree with you. I think the norm's gonna trend a little bit more towards those top 16 seeds moving forward.
Yeah, and it's just kind of interesting because I kind of pointed out all those matchups here. We very well could see some chaos this year. I don't know how necessarily how high you are on like a team like High Point or a team like Akron, but I think the big question then would be, can these teams advance to an extra round like Troy? I think for them it would be tough because I personally think Vanderbilt's going to beat McNeese, so I don't know if Troy would be able to advance. VCU is going to have to match up with Illinois, presumably, if they can get past Penn in the next round. So it is going to be tough. I do think one of the more interesting matchups, though, everybody's high on Arkansas. Obviously, SEC champs, they're playing their best basketball right now. Everybody loves Darius Acuff, as do I, of course. I think they've got a tough matchup here with Hawaii. This is an underrated Hawaii team. They've got a ton of size. Hawaii's not necessarily, I don't think they utilize their size to the best of their advantage, but size definitely plays a factor here in March. We all know guard play is by far the most important, so Darius Acuff is going to be a huge X factor here. But if they can shut him down, get into the rim, force him into some outside shots, maybe, gets off to a bit of a slow start, Hawaii can control the pace. Remember, who was the last SEC champ that was a 4 seed that everybody was high on going into the tournament? Everybody had going to the Final Four. Everybody had going very far. That was Auburn a couple of years ago when they lost to Yale in the first round. I'm not necessarily calling for the upset here. I'm probably going to pick Arkansas. I don't know if I can go against Darius Acuff and Calipari right now, but I think that could be another interesting matchup. So I think there are definitely a lot of avenues here for chaos to happen, and I'm certainly hoping for it because I don't want to say last year was boring. The first round definitely was a little lackluster. I do think it made for some really good matchups later on in the tournament. Obviously, Duke, Houston lived up to the hype. The championship game was great between Houston and Florida. Florida and Texas Tech was a great game. It's not like I'm going to say March Madness is ruined if there is a lack of upsets or anything, but I'm definitely looking for some chaos here in this round, and I do think that it's much more likely than last year.
Yeah, and we were talking briefly before we started. You're high on UCLA's draw. You think the Bruins could definitely make a run. How far they go is to be determined, but you do like the draw and getting UCF, having a second round matchup with UConn, and then potentially playing a Michigan State team that they've already beat. They actually just beat them earlier this past weekend in the Big Ten tournament. UCLA is definitely a team to monitor. I think for me, the number one double digit seed I'm taking is VCU over North Carolina. This is a Tar Heels team that is simply not the same without Caleb Wilson, and I think VCU, they're infamous for being on that 11 seed line and making either Elite 8, Sweet 16, or Final Four runs. I could definitely see them winning at least one game here against North Carolina. Illinois, number one offense in the country, but very susceptible to baskets defensively. And after watching Penn play Yale, they have a true power four talent in TJ Power, formerly at Duke and Virginia, now at Penn, with former Iowa head coach Fran McCaffery running the X's and O's for Penn. So I do think with the way the Ivy Leagues tend to play in March, I think that could be the highest of the seeds to monitor, which is 14 seed Penn and Illinois. I do think that could be a very high scoring game if it gets to that point. I looking at some of the other ones, I agree on High Point. I like McNeese. I think it's a tough matchup for them with it being Vanderbilt, but at the same time, that could very much, we could very much flip the script on that. McNeese might be even better than they were last year when they beat Clemson. And Vanderbilt's riding high right now, I think, off of the SEC tournament, the win against Florida, losing in the SEC championship game to Arkansas. But sometimes these do lead to some letdown spots, and Vanderbilt could be susceptible to that here. I like Akron a lot, especially offensively. And out of all the 5 seeds, this might be the one, just from a pure fan of basketball. I hate picking against Texas Tech, but with the injuries that they currently have on their team, this would definitely give the 5-12 upset vibe. Like, it gives that vibe for sure. I think Akron's got one of the best offenses in the country. Statistically, they do, but getting Texas Tech and then potentially playing the Alabama Hofstra winner in the next round, 2 other high-powered offenses, Akron's got a pretty nice draw here as a 12 if they want to at least get past the round of 32. Obviously, they'd likely be running into Michigan at that point, but you never know. And I think Akron is a team to monitor for sure. We'll talk about Miami, Ohio here in a second, but I like Santa Clara against Kentucky. I think the Santa Clara team is very good. That's been proven being an at-large West Coast Conference team to make the field of 68. They've got a lot of talent. They've got a lot of discipline as well as a team, and they're going to be playing a Kentucky team that is probably, outside of a Kansas or BYU, one of the more wild card teams in this entire tournament because if Kentucky plays at their peak and plays at that $22 million NIL evaluation, they could make a run, but they haven't really shown that most of the year, so I don't envision Kentucky going too far. Kansas is a team to just keep an eye on, being on that 4 line. They do have a lot of talent. They have a very tough draw, though, so I don't see them getting past what would be the Sweet 16. Even that, I do think St. John's is going to inevitably play Duke when that time comes. I'm not surprised by too many of the seeds, like where teams were specifically. Some of the 12 and 13s, I think, are interchangeable. You could throw some of the 11s in there as well. I think Northern Iowa is going to be a very tough out for St. John's because they like to slow you down. They're going to keep that game close and low scoring against a St. John's team that does not shoot the ball particularly well from beyond the arc. So Northern Iowa plays a style that could definitely give St. John's some trouble. Outside of that, I mean, we can talk about Miami now, but I we had a little bit of a disagreement here. We both think Miami should be in the field. I don't think that ever should have been in question. But they have Miami in the first four. I personally would have just made them an at-large true 11 seed and put a different team in the first four. I think putting them on the 11 line is fair. I think it's justified. But I think they should have avoided the first four.
Yeah, I think I disagree here. I told a lot of people, kind of leading up to this, that once they lost to UMass, I said that they're going to be the last team in. And honestly, I think they kind of have to be okay with that, right? All they can kind of ask for at this point is an opportunity to get in and prove themselves, and that's exactly what they're getting here. Now, obviously, everybody looks at the record, 31-0, of course, extremely impressive. I'm not taking anything away from that, but it just kind of puts a damper on things when you get into the first round of your conference tournament and you lose the way that they did. It kind of was a similar game, the way that they had played all season. Some of these close games, they had led most of the way, and then they just weren't able to finish the deal. And I truly do believe if they would have beaten UMass in that game, I think they would have gotten out of that first four. And I do think that they would have comfortably been in that original 64. But I think they have to be okay with this. They have to understand that they do not really have the signature wins that some of these other teams do. And to their point here, I think I would argue they would prefer this. Think about where Miami is. You have that high of that crazy game of beating Ohio at Ohio. It's a rivalry game to cap off an undefeated regular season. Ohio misses the buzzer beater to go to overtime. You pull it out. Crazy emotional high, crazy win. And you fall flat here to start the conference tournament, but you're in. Now you kind of get a leg up on the competition here. Teams that play in these first four play-in games, especially the 11 seeds, tend to have success in the round of 64. So honestly, I think this could be good for Miami. You kind of get a chance to bounce back. You get a chance to prove yourself against a middle of the pack ACC team. SMU is a little inconsistent for my liking. I know they're rather large favorites over Miami, and again, I do think rightfully so. But if Miami is able to pull this off, I think they could gain a little bit of momentum going into the tournament, kind of get some of that confidence back. I would argue that they kind of needed that loss going into the tournament. Yes, it would have been cool to see them go undefeated and win the MAC and do all of that things. I was certainly rooting for them to do so, but I do think that them losing that game could be a nice little reset for them. All right, we're no longer undefeated. You reset the emotions of everything. You come into the tournament now, and now you get a chance to prove yourself as one of these standalone play-in games. Gain a little bit of momentum going into the tournament. So I like where Miami's at. I don't know if they beat SMU, and I don't even know if they beat Tennessee, but I think they're rightfully seated, and I think that they have to be happy with where they're at.
I, for the most part, agree. It's just when you obviously all the metrics are against Miami, Ohio at this point. The one that is in their favor, though, is obviously that strength of record. So, how strength of record works is how many other teams would have the same record with that same schedule, or what's the likelihood of it. And they do have a very favorable strength of record, but that's, in my opinion, simply because teams don't go undefeated like that anymore. And if we do see it, it's typically Gonzaga in the West Coast Conference. But even then, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, some of these other teams in the West Coast Conference, San Francisco as well, they're starting to catch up to Gonzaga a little bit, and they are making life much more difficult. I think we see that with the 3 bids for the WCC. But for Miami, in almost every single year, there has been an 11 seed of some shape or form to come out of that first four and then win that round of 64 game. It's happened actually more times than not that the first four participant, one of those 11 seeds, wins 2 games and gets to round 32. It's a very common thing. We've seen Syracuse do it. We've seen VCU do it. We may see this Miami team do it. But I do think the draw wasn't favorable for them, having to play a very good SMU team. They are a little bit inconsistent, but they're getting their best players back for this tournament. Those guys have been out for a period of time, so I do think SMU is a sneaky team as well on that 11 line. They could very well win a game or two as well against an inconsistent Tennessee team that doesn't have a lot of depth. They do have some size. They can be physically imposing, but I think out of all the 6 seeds, Tennessee is one of the ones that, like, I want to say you would rather get, but you also would rather not get because of the experience of Rick Barnes coaching his team, what Tennessee has always had a tendency to do in March as well, at least getting to the Sweet 16 more times than not. So I think for Miami, in the future, obviously the easy answer is schedule these games. But when you reach out to all these schools and they don't accept, or they don't even reach back out, you kind of have to. I don't want to say beggars can be choosers, but you kind of have to bear with Miami with the fact that they did try scheduling all these games and no one wanted to schedule them. So they did what they did with their schedule. I mean, I think that's definitely justified for sure. But I think genuinely, I think from top to bottom, Akron's probably a better team in the MAC than Miami is, especially with the amount of nail biting games that Miami Ohio had. I mean, it was honestly astonishing that they were able to win every single late game, close game that they had all season long. And eventually, obviously, that did not happen playing a UMass team that took them to the brink of defeat not once but twice, and then finally in that third game. So Miami's an interesting story, but I don't think they're the only one. Obviously, you talked about Arkansas and Darius Acuff. They are probably the sleeper in that entire region to come out and be the Final Four representative because, man, Darius Acuff, a lot of people are going to say he's probably the best freshman in the country. I disagree because AJ Devonsta exists, because Darren Peterson exists, and because Cam Boozer also exists. But he's definitely making the case, and he has been playing out of this world for about the last month of the season. He has truly ascended this Arkansas team. He's ascended the overall outlook as well for Coach Calipari on this season, and he's going to be him and Arkansas. They're going to be a very tough out here in this tournament for sure. If he can continue to play at the level that he is, and if DJ Wagner can continue producing off the bench for this Razorbacks team.
Yeah, they're going to be a team to watch. They're going to be a popular pick, out of that region. But again, I think they got a bit of a tough draw. I mean, they have to play. If they do beat, I kind of talked about Hawaii. It's going to be a tough matchup with as much size as Hawaii has. But then they're going to get if they go to the next round. If Wisconsin survives High Point, it's going to be another track meet, and that's kind of the style that Wisconsin wants to play. We have seen, they lost to Michigan, but that was kind of after Michigan slowed them down. They made things tough. But you saw against Illinois, they beat Illinois because Illinois wanted to play fast. They wanted to match that tempo. And honestly, I feel like Arkansas would kind of want to do the same. But we've seen Arkansas struggle in some of these high tempo games. Remember they lost at Alabama when Darius Acuff, I think he had like 50 points in overtime. Half the team fouled out. He played great, but they lost that game. Of course, that was a bit of a different circumstance. So it's going to be tough having to run into Arizona, who, as of right now, having to look at it, I mean, Arizona is probably. Well, I have not decided on my national champion yet, but Arizona's certainly in the mix there. I do like Arizona to come out of that region. I will say, I think the hardest part of this is trying to not pick 4 1 seeds because we all know that isn't going to happen. But the key is picking which 1 seeds make it and which non 1 seeds make it. So I'll give you a bit of a glimpse. Right now, the 2 1 seeds I have making it right now are Arizona and Michigan. I think those are the 2 1 seeds I have. I do not think Duke and Florida are going to make the Final Four.
I do think I haven't actually sat down and made a bracket. It's like the first time ever. I haven't had like four done already, but I do think St. John's potentially knocks off Duke. It's going to be tough if they can't shoot the basketball, but they're the one team that can be as physically imposing as possible early on against this Duke team that is still battling multiple injuries to starters. But then also, it's Coach Patino. He understands the moment, the I don't want to say rivalry, but understanding what Duke is, what they're about. Coach Shire, and just from a game plan perspective, St. John's is going to be one of those teams that definitely could knock off Duke. UConn is obviously a name that people are going to resonate with and think about if Duke can get past St. John's, but that region in general is very tough. And for Duke to get the number one overall seed and have to deal with St. John's, Kansas, Michigan State, the list goes on and on and on. Even in their 8-9 game, TSU has had a very up and down year, but they have some of the best wins you could have. I mean, they beat Florida. They lost to Michigan by 3. And then they've also got some pretty bad losses. Ohio State playing their best basketball all season long in the last 4 or 5 games. They've got one of the best players in the country in Bruce Thornton. And when you have one of the best players in the country, you automatically have a chance in this tournament. That is the one thing to just take note of when you're trying to pick these upsets. What teams have those dynamic players? Penn, Cal Baptist. There's several teams that have guys that are leading the country in various categories that probably have not been heard of. So I do think it's worth taking the time to look at all these teams and what they actually have on their rosters. Because while some of them may not have the trademark wins, they do have some of the trademark talent needed to beat some of these lower seeded teams. I personally think out of all the one seeds, the two that probably have the toughest road are Duke, and I'm gonna lean Michigan here. They have kind of, I don't want to say faltered of late, but 3 straight games they did not cover the spread, and the third they lost to Purdue in the Big Ten tournament. They have had to battle without LJ Kayson off the bench. He's really been their lead offensive generator off of the reserve unit, and now that he's out for the year, they've really kind of struggled at times offensively. And for the people who might want to pick Michigan, the question is going to be, can you get 6 straight flawless games out of Elliot Cadeau at that point guard position? Is he going to be able to shoot the basketball all those games? Is he going to have some lackluster performances? Even Yaxel Lendenborg, he has been very quiet. In the Big Ten tournament, he only averaged around 9 points per game. He only had 5 against Ohio State. So he's someone that's going to have to turn it on here, especially if they do run into some of those other teams in their region. One of those, Alabama, could give Michigan some problems if they turn this into a track meet. But at the same time, we're saying that Alabama's a team that tends to fall flat in the NCAA tournament. It's going to be either all gas and no brakes for Arkansas or all brakes and no gas because they may not even get out of the round of 32. So they're a team to watch. But I think overall, Michigan and Duke, despite being probably the two best teams in the country for most of the year outside of Arizona, they probably have the two toughest draws when Duke is supposed to have the easiest one, and Michigan fell from the number 1 overall seed to the 3rd overall seed. I agree. I try to avoid even putting 2 number 1 seeds. At most, I try to get 2 number 1 seeds in the Final Four, never more than that. But after last season, seeing how much chalk it was the first time we had 4 number 1 seeds make the Final Four since 2008. I do think it's worth considering the possibility of that happening because the top 4 to 7 teams in the country are the elite of the elite. So I do think we could get 3 2 seeds and a 1 seed, or 2 1 seeds and 2 2 seeds, or whatever the case may be. But I do strongly advise against putting 3 or more in the Final Four, just because the chance of that happening is such a rarity, and it usually does not happen.
Yeah, and I know it's easy to just kind of pick the one seed because when you're going through and you're picking these matchups, it's like, all right, well, Michigan, they're better than this team, they're better than this team. So, yeah, I think they're going to, they're going to win this matchup. And then when you get down to the Final Four, you're like, oh, well, I have all chalk. Well, that's not going to happen. Then you got to go back and change it. But yeah, I think a team that people are kind of overlooking in Michigan's region, just to kind of circle back, is Iowa State. I'm really high in the Big 12 this year. I think the Big 12 has been the best conference in basketball this year. I mean, they're just so deep. So I'm personally really big on strength of schedule. I really do think that prepares you for the tournament. Hence, that's why I'm not falling for the Duke trap this year. Just because, I know Duke has proven themselves. They beat Michigan, but they play in a weaker ACC, and I took Duke last year. First of all, I think Duke's team last year was better than they are this year. I think Cooper Flagg is better than Cam Boozer. I think Con Knipple is better than any guard that Duke has right now. I thought Kaman Malawak was phenomenal, and Duke made it to the Final Four, and they choked against Houston. So was that due to strength of schedule? I'm not sure. But I have a hard time picking a lot of these ACC teams because I just don't think that the conference prepares them well enough for tournament time. I think that's why Gonzaga is always seeded very highly all these years, and they haven't really gotten as far as they would have hoped. And so I know they've made some runs in some years when they've had some of their better teams, but still, that's why you see the SEC, you see the Big Ten, even the Big 12. All those teams go the farthest because those are the three best conferences. So. Yeah, I am really big on strength of schedule, so I could see Iowa State. I think they've got a pretty favorable path to get to the Elite Eight. But then, now, all right, so I have Michigan and Iowa State in my Elite Eight. I said all year Michigan had what it takes to win the national championship this year. I thought their guards were playing well. They've got the size, they've got the experience. They've got the coaching to go with it. They have tournament experience from last season. I know it's a bit of a different team, but still, so it's certainly going to be tough to pick some of these matchups. But for Duke, I'll be honest right now, I have Ohio State beating Duke in the round of 32. I might change that. I don't know. It's currently a bit of a homer pick, but I seriously do think Ohio State has what it takes to knock off a team like Duke. You talked about Bruce Thornton and how you need these dynamic players to win in March, specifically the guard play. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. The only reason Florida won last year was because Walter Clayton hit multiple big-time shots. Every time in the clutch, they could rely on a dynamic guard. I think that's why Houston has fallen short. Some of these years, they have not had the guard play to step up with it. That's why Michigan State has fallen short year in and year out. I don't think they have the guard play to match the dominant bigs that they have. They've got the size. They can rebound. They can hang with a lot of teams. But then when it gets down to guard play and elite shot making, they just don't have it. That's why I'm not confident in them or UConn here this year. So, look. Part of this, yes, is being a homer, but I really do think that Ohio State can match up with a lot of teams. I think Bruce Thornton is great. I think he's been itching for this opportunity to get into the tournament. He's a 4-year senior. He has paid his dues. He is going to make the most of this opportunity. I think John Mobley can be a nice X factor, phenomenal three-point shooter. But in Ohio State now, they've got Christoph Tilly. They actually have some size down low for the first time in quite a while. So I'm not saying that he's going to completely neutralize Cam Boozer. Cam Boozer is going to get his, no doubt about that. But I do think Tilly can control the glass a little bit. And if Ohio State comes out and they get a bit of a lead, with these injuries that Duke has, I know Caden Boozer played really well in the ACC championship against Virginia, but is that really sustainable? I just don't know. I personally wouldn't bet on it. And again, I could completely look like a fool, but I do not think Duke is going to make it out of this region personally. I think that this region is just too much of a crapshoot, and I think they're going to be too much of a popular pick that I think I'm going to be a little bold here. And I think Ohio State St. John's would be a phenomenal Sweet 16 matchup. I'm a little torn there because St. John's fell short last year, obviously. I do think they're better this year. I think Rick Pitino, it was kind of his first time back in the tournament. Now he's kind of gotten back into the swing of things. I think St. John's is playing their best basketball of the season right now. Again, it's kind of how Ohio State is. Peaking at the right time, I think, is very, very important coming into this tournament. Again, it's the same thing with Arkansas and Wisconsin, right? Those teams are getting hot at the right time, but yeah, I kind of goes back to the point where we can definitely see some upsets here, but I do think Duke is probably my faultiest 1 seed, which is kind of ironic given that they are the overall number 1 seed in this tournament.
And I think a lot of that is accredited to the injuries they currently have on their roster, and knowing Caleb Foster's probably not coming back at all, and Ngamba is questionable. We don't know when he's going to come back, but a couple of teams that we haven't really taken a lot of time to talk about. Another team in Michigan's region that I would probably pick as my sleeper in any other region except the one that it's in is Virginia. This Virginia team is very good. The problem is they might have to run into the gauntlet of Michigan or Alabama and then also Iowa State. And with all due respect to Virginia, it's really hard picking against Iowa State. And that's how it is every year for me with the style of basketball that they play, the depth that they have, the shooting and offensive firepower on their team. I think Iowa State is probably the worst 2 seed Virginia could draw. But if they were not in that Michigan region, I would likely lean Virginia in a matchup against a 2 seed or whoever it may be because they have slept under the radar for quite some time here in the last couple months of the year. Another team to think about. This is the most Final Four or round of 64 upset team, in my opinion. It's probably Wisconsin. This is a team that when they get going from three and they make all those shots like they did against Michigan in the regular season, and even in the Big Ten tournament when they came back, that is a team that is extremely difficult to defend. And if they're on that night from three and from beyond the arc or wherever it may be, they could give a team like Arizona fits, especially at the pace that they want to play. But if they get into a big shooting lull or they struggle one night against a team like High Point who can match them offensively, it's going to be a tough challenge. So Wisconsin's kind of a make or break pick for teams, I think, or for people picking. I think those two teams are definitely two to keep an eye on as well. No one's talking about Louisville, mostly because Michael Brown has this back injury. He may or may not play, but even with Michael Brown, I think South Florida beats Louisville. This is a very good South Florida team. USF has a lot of size. They're pretty balanced offensively and defensively. And for those same reasons, they very easily could turn around and beat Michigan State in the following round to get a matchup with UConn. So I know the tricky part about Duke's region is all the different coaching matchups you can have. Mick Cronin, Dan Hurley, Tom Izzo, Shire, Pitino. The list goes on and on. Are people going to be picking that region for coaching matchups, or are they going to be picking that region based off what the teams have actually produced all year? I think that's a big question for sure that teams have to think about, and for what people have to think about when they're making these picks. But I think overall we'll get a few more upsets than we did last year. I'm not sure how many big time ones. Like at 8-9, we can say it's an upset, but 9 seeds actually have over the last 20 years won more games against the eights, and the eights have won against the nines. So that is something to think about when picking these games. I do think this year, I think Ohio State being an 8 wins theirs, but I think Iowa as a 9 wins their game, and then some of the other 8-9s are still tricky. I mean, Utah State, Villanova, for example, I think the 9 seed Utah State probably takes that one as well. So I do think it'll be another dominant 9 seed year in that round of 64. And then also the 7-10 games. Those ones are always a crapshoot to pick as well. I think Santa Clara being a 10 wins. I think Miami being a 7 wins. So it's going to be tricky picking those games, as always. I do think it's a little bit easier to pick the 5-12 or the 4-13 and even the 3-14, because in the last few years, the 3-14 has produced a lot of upsets, and even the 2-15 has. The year Arizona lost to Princeton, Ohio State, Oral Roberts, the list goes on. But I do think when we get down to the Sweet 16 or down to the Elite Eight, we're going to have almost all 5 seeds or better in there. And in that case, it's essentially chalk. So I just think the very top of college basketball, the elite of the elites, is going to find a way to be there. It's all those iffy kind of top 20 teams and below that could be susceptible to a loss. I do think that's definitely a possibility. And we could have that same conversation if we were to talk about the women's bracket, because as we know, there's a very elite 1 to 5 teams in women's college basketball. And then after that, there's a drop off for the next 10 teams. And then after that is an even bigger drop off. That's why when you do a women's bracket, you almost always can go chalk, because it's typically how it always plays out. There's going to be a few upsets, but definitely fewer than what we're going to get in the men's tournament. So with that, I have to do my bracket. We're going to do a bracket for the podcast. We'll post it. We'll post both of ours as well. We'll track them for everybody. But I have to get to bracket picking because I have not had the chance to do it yet. So
Yeah, there's still some matchups that I haven't decided on, like Louisville, South Florida. I simply cannot decide. You know, getting down like St. John's, Ohio State, can't really decide, and like Louisville, South Florida, I think the winner of that game is going to depend who takes on Michigan State. I'm not really confident in Michigan State moving on. Right now, I think Vanderbilt, Florida. If that's a Sweet 16 matchup, we've already seen Vanderbilt beat Florida. I'm not sure who really wins there. Illinois, Houston in the Sweet 16, I think could be another tough matchup. So there's definitely a lot of matchups that I'm going to keep mulling over. But I think the hardest part here is just not trying to overthink it, not trying to get too cute. Just kind of go with your gut and see how the chips fall.
Hopefully, it works out for everybody doing their picks. And with that, very short episode, 35 minutes, will conclude here. We may post again later this week or again next week, early in the week, but with that, that'll conclude episode 24 of Beyond the Box Score, March Madness exclusive here for this one. I want to thank everybody for listening to this short one. Like, subscribe, share, comment, whatever it is you do on the various platforms you do it from. We appreciate the interaction. We want that interaction, and we hope you continue to support us. So with that, Trayvon Hastings, Joey Korzanowski signing off. We'll see you guys in the next one.